Well, good afternoon, everybody. We want to welcome you to the city of Carlsbad, and thank you for coming to our panel discussion and community meeting on Highway 101, past, present, and future. My name's Gary Barbario. I'm the Assistant City Manager for the city of Carlsbad, and I'll be your MC today. Yay, all right. We're off to a great start. First, I'd like to acknowledge several individuals who are here with us today. Carlsbad Mayor Matt Hall. Matt. Our Mayor Pro Tem Keith Blackburn. Council Member Michael Schumacher. And then Council Member Corey Schumacher is here. Yes, great. Thank you, Corey. Our City Manager, Kevin Crawford. Our Chief Operations Officer, Marisa Lundstedt. And our City Clerk, Barbara Ingleson. I'd also like to acknowledge some elected officials from our neighboring city of Encinitas, the Mayor Catherine Blakespear, and newly elected Councilmember Tasha Berner Horvath. Is that good? And then we also have many of our department heads here at the City of Carlsbad in attendance. So welcome everybody, and thank you for being here. So this is the fifth in a series of featuring panels that we have done over the past year or two here in Carlsbad. We did one in this auditorium on autonomous and connected vehicles, big data and open government, the future of energy. And then at our Faraday Center, we had a featuring conference on responding to rising sea level. And so this is the fifth in the series, and of course today's subject is Highway 101. Today we won't be speaking about any specific project the city is contemplating in our Carlsbad Boulevard corridor. Rather, we'll be looking at national, regional, and local trends that might influence how we go about planning for Highway 101 in Carlsbad in the future. This event is in support of one of our City Council's 6 goals. They have a goal to enhance Carlsbad's coastline to ensure an exceptional experience in all the ways people want to enjoy it. And I got to tell you, this is my favorite work at the city here of Carlsbad that I get to work on. Really exciting. I mean, how challenging is it to work near the beach, right? I mean, great job. The format for today's presentation will be a series of 3 presentations. Individuals will be brought in to speak to you about different things relating to the Coast Highway. The first presentation will feature Planning, Sustainability, and Agricultural Consultant Peter Norby, who will cover the history of Highway 101 here in Carlsbad and throughout San Diego. The second presentation will be led by civic innovator Dan Burden, who will share how communities nationwide have adapted their roads and transportation options to improve the quality of life in that community. And our last speaker will be from Circulate San Diego, the Director of Advocacy there, Kathleen Ferrier, who will address successful projects right here in San Diego County. We'll end the afternoon with a 15 or 20 minute or so question and answer period, depending on how much time we have at the end. We do have question and answer cards and staff, so they'll be circulating those, and we'll be collecting those and then trying to answer as many of those questions as we can. And then after the panel, we'll be in the courtyard. There'll be refreshments, the historic photos if you didn't get a chance to look at those, and then staff will also be there, and hopefully if we didn't get your questions answered up here on stage, then we can try and answer them out there in the courtyard. So I'd like to first introduce our first speaker, Peter Norby. Let me roast him first. Okay? Peter is a San Diego native and a 34-year resident of Carlsbad. Peter is a consultant in the fields of planning, agriculture, and sustainability. For the past 4 years, he has served as a special projects coordinator for the city of Carlsbad. Peter also serves as a planning and sustainability consultant for the Leashtag Foundation, as well as transportation manufacturers and energy companies. Regionally, Peter has served as a San Diego County Planning Commissioner for the past 9 years. Prior to his position in Carlsbad, Peter worked for approximately 17 years with the city of Encinitas in various positions, including serving as the Highway 101 corridor coordinator for over 10 years. In 2004, Peter and the city of Encinitas received the Great American Main Street Award from the National Trust for Historic Preservation for their work in restoring downtown Encinitas. I personally describe Peter as kind of Carlsbad's modern-day Renaissance man. He's a baker, a placemaker, a winemaker, an energizer, a sun catcher, and a Highway 101 sage. The city is fortunate to have Peter working with us, and it's my pleasure to introduce Peter Norby.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Gary. Let me just start off by thanking all of you for making your time out of the day to come here and join us. I also want to thank the city of Carlsbad and our team that put the last few days together and this presentation together. And I really want to call out, especially in our Carlsbad City Library, Sarah Dana, our senior librarian, for all of the work that she has done, sorting through literally thousands of images and doing data collection and history collection for us. And so before I begin my remarks, let me also call out 3 very special people on the Highway 101, and 2 of them are here, and one of them is no longer with us. But I'd like to acknowledge John Daly from the city of Oceanside, the 101 Cafe in Oceanside, and John, as well as Kathleen Flanagan, were instrumental in working with Oceanside to work with our legislature, and they worked with Senator Craven and Assemblyman Bill Morrow, and the city of Oceanside took the lead and had Highway 101 designated a state historic route throughout the entire 900 miles plus of California in 1998. So John, thank you for that great work and congratulations. So if you're a native, you know we have perhaps 1 or 2 great writers in San Diego, and my favorite writer in all of San Diego, he's been writing for the San Diego Union now for many decades. He has been a gentleman who has covered Highway 101 from many different angles over the course of the last 30 years, and really, really happy to have him in Bird Rock yesterday as we toured Bird Rock as well as here, and that is Logan Jenkins. Logan, you're an amazing writer. Thank you for being here. Okay, let's get started. Can you all hear me? Okay, so the story of Highway 101 really begins before California became a state in our union. It begins in the 1760s, About 80 years prior to that, the Spanish conquistadors landed in La Paz, set up their first mission in Loreto, and then in the 1760s, the first mission was established in San Diego. And over the course of the next 30 or 40 years, 21 missions spanned from Sonoma, north of San Francisco, all the way down to San Diego. And for 100 years, this route, as it grew and as these areas became more popular, from 1760 to really 1880, it was all getting on an animal or getting pulled by an animal or walking. And so the missions were set roughly 1 day, horseback apart. You can imagine the great transportation changes in the last 200 years that have occurred, but think about this for a second before we go any further. Our civilized cities on Earth are over 10,000 years old. They are Damascus, they are Athens, they are Aleppo, they are Sidon, and some Jericho, and some great old cities. And imagine for a second, 9,800 years, nothing changed in land transportation. You walked, you rode an animal, or you were pulled by an animal. So change is occurring quicker the last 200 years, and as technology improves, it's changing even quicker. This picture is a steam shovel that is from 1922 that is driving east on Elm Avenue after turning from Highway 101. Now, what's really great about this era, in the 1920s, there were per 1,000 population, there were 86 cars. So most people were still in the horse and buggy. So this was an era of great change. You have steam equipment powered by steam engine. Of course, the rail was powered by steam. You have the new invention, which is the internal combustion car, and you have the horse and buggy, which had been there for the prior 100 years on this road. And you think about today, not a whole lot's changed. We're 100 years down the road, and we have gas cars, and we're transitioning to plug-in hybrids and electric cars, and our cars are becoming more sentient, and they have the ability to brake, and they have the ability to steer, and they have the ability to avoid accidents. They're becoming autonomous. And the great change that's coming in 10 or 15 years, of course, in transportation, and all that that means will be autonomous cars and electrification for sure. So again, we find ourselves in a period of adaptation, much like they were in the 1920s. Great picture from the California Highway Commission periodical. Now, this organization started the highway system in California in the 1910s, and this picture is from 1925, and the U.S. transportation system didn't start till 1928. So before it was called U.S. Highway 101, it was called California's Pacific Coast Road. So a lot of times, or Pacific Coast Highway. A lot of times we hear PCH, or we hear Coast Highway, we hear Highway 101, and in Carlsbad's case, we hear Carlsbad Boulevard, and they're all accurate descriptions of the road. But some things I want to point out. We've recently worked in this area here to remove a really, really poor intersection. And how did that intersection get there? Well, the original road through Carlsbad, the first paved and only paved road through Carlsbad, was this road. And this goes down State Street, Carlsbad Village Drive, and Ocean Street. So if you've wondered how this pork chop got here, and if you've wondered, oops, excuse me, let me go back. All right, we're getting there. There we go. And if you've wondered how this kind of grassy area got here next to Witt Surf Shop in Harborfish South, it's because this alignment was put in 1926, and this bridge was created to remove the rail crossing as part of the highway. So our orientation, Carlsbad Boulevard through Carlsbad, was really set with a two-lane configuration in 1926. By the 1930s, the road had grown to 3 lanes, and you can see the heavy oil deposits on the northbound lane and the southbound lane, and then the middle lane was a passing lane. It was also a lane where you would make a left turn movement. Similar here, the California Carlsbad Hotel, you can see the oil deposits on the road. Again, Carlsbad Boulevard and State Street were probably the only 2 paved road at the time. A lot of dirt roads coming into the area, and a lot of rooftop signs. And so the speed of the car was 50 to 60 miles an hour. Pedestrians were not encouraged or not allowed. If you think of Highway 5 today, you're prohibited to be a pedestrian or a bicyclist on Highway 5. Such was the case during the U.S. highway era of Highway 101. So you attracted the attention of motorists passing by at high speeds with road sign. Now this building is no longer with us, but the Lutheran home, Carlsbad Lutheran home that replaced it, draws heavily on the influence of this building. So these 2 rooms right here housed mineral springs, alkaline mineral springs from the Alt Carlsbad well across the street. And these 2 architectural pieces that jut out towards the street, as well as the overall architectural design, was incorporated into the Carlsbad Lutheran home. So past helps with our present. The 1950s were an incredible time for the city of Carlsbad. So the power plant was built between 1950, with a stack being built in 1954, and you can see that up here. Terramar existed, but just about half of it, and the first piece of Highway 5 was put in between 1950 and 1953. That was called the Oceanside Carlsbad Bypass, and it connected at Palomar Airport Road. Now, part 2 of the project, south of Palomar Airport Road, going all the way to the border of the city, was changed from a 3-lane road to a 4-lane freeway with a median. And the original alignment for Highway 5 was to go down that coastline. And you can imagine Encinitas, you can imagine South Carlsbad, but that is why the width is so wide in South Carlsbad, because the land was acquired for it to be Highway 5. Now, we know Highway 5 took an inland route or a straight route, and what we were left with is this kind of 10 or 12 acre mess of roadway at Palomar Airport. It's still there. So all of the other roads just nicely tee into Highway 101, but Palomar Airport is a series of, on-ramps and off-ramps. I don't know what we should do with that land. It's up to the community. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion. Is it natural? Is it parking for beach access? Is it some bluff top restaurants? I don't know. but it shouldn't be leftover asphalt from a road element and a freeway that was removed in the 1950s, not at that location. This is a close-up. In a modern picture, you can see turnarounds right here, you can see the bridge right here, and when the road was constructed, here's turnarounds here, and this is a bridge over the west and eastbound lanes of Highway 5. So, newly minted city, Carlsbad was very proud. This bypass was constructed, and then the road was turned over to local control. So from Hollywood south, Highway 101 is a local road. It generally parallels Highway 5, so no more state control, no more federal control. North of Hollywood, it's still a state route under the control of Caltrans. So when it became a local road, and when it was bypassed, the City Council of Carlsbad said, well, let's kind of have a contest and let's have some names submitted in terms of what we should rename it. So the several names are up there. The finalists were Carlsbad Boulevard and Pacific Boulevard, and Carlsbad's paper of record, the Carlsbad Journal, held a ballot, and the overwhelming choice was Carlsbad Boulevard. So by ordinance, on September 15th, 1953, thank you again to the Carlsbad Library System, the name Carlsbad Boulevard was selected for this stretch of road. In 1959, the parking lot at Tamarack was built. So it's somewhat shocking to think during the post-war years, but we doubled in population in the county of San Diego from 1940 to 1950, and then we doubled again from 1950 to 1960, generally speaking, about 170% between those 2 decades. The car was coming on strong, but again, this road is a local road, so what you can't see here, this is Vigalucci's today. There's a sign on it that says Eats. This is the bathroom that's still there that was constructed in '53. And there's a speed limit sign right here that says 35 miles an hour. So we began to reduce the speed of the road at that time. Don't know if we'd be able to create a parking lot on the beach today, but we certainly did in 1959. That was a state project, by the way. Carlsbad and Oceanside were fortunate. We had our bypass, but the rest of North County wasn't as fortunate. And so Highway 5 was completed throughout the city of San Diego around 65 and through San Diego and LA around 68 to 1970. So this picture is from a Sunday, San Diego Historical Society. It's from a Sunday in 1961 in the afternoon, and you can see most people are heading back to LA, and that condition, of course, exists today as well on Highway 5. What's remarkable about this picture is today Highway 101 carries between 15 and 20,000 cars, but in its heyday, right before Highway 5, it carried between 40 and 50,000 cars a day, and its design speed was 65 miles an hour. This picture is from 1973, and it shows the robust population of Carlsbad at 17,300 people. So we've grown a lot in a very managed and good way, in my opinion. But the traffic engineer in that steam shovel picture had to deal with about 200 cars. And the traffic engineer in 1973, at a rate of 540 plus cars per 1,000 population, had to deal with about 10,000 cars. And the traffic engineer today, even though we've passed peak car, and you'll notice peak car is right here in 2007, and we continue to decline and go down, and the projections are to go down quickly as we adopt a more shared mentality with cars. The traffic engineer today is handling and has to deal with about 90,000 cars in the city of Carlsbad. So although tempting to blame the traffic engineer for parking and traffic, we really need to look at each other and blame each other. We're all car owners and we're part of that 90,000. So Craig, that's a shout out to you wherever you are. Be nice to Craig. Big storm, winter of 1883, and many sections of Highway 101 throughout North County were damaged. And this set into action a lot of state work to armor the coast and to protect the road. If you're familiar with this area, you know there's about a 3-foot high wall there, so this doesn't happen again. And as a motorist, you say, well, I don't like the wall because it blocks the view of the Pacific Ocean, and I can tell you there is a solution to that, and that is ride a bike, and you have a beautiful view of the Pacific Ocean. The bridges were the last things to be repaired, and if you're kind of aware, or to be replaced, and if you're aware of some recent conversations in Del Mar and others, there's a lot of love for these old bridges that are 2-lane bridges, but the 80s were a different era. We were a very, I don't mean to be mean to Chrysler, but the Chrysler K-car was not a great car in the 1980s, right? And it was a decade that wasn't so great, but very car-centered. So this was the old two-lane bridge and the cold water intake of Agua Hedionda Lagoon and the power plant that was removed in the 1980s to make way for the four-lane bridge that's there right now. If we were facing this situation today, I'm pretty confident our decision would be somewhat different. But in the 80s, that was our decision. This is a great story that has a lot of lessons for today. This is the Carlsbad seawall. So the state of California, Boating and Waterways, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers who designed this, they were afraid that we were going to lose Carlsbad Boulevard, that bluff was going to fall and we were going to lose our road. So they created this barrier. Now, the state of California, Boating and Waterways, it was a $5 million project. It was going to be a straight wall right up against the bluff. But the city of Carlsbad said, what if, through our redevelopment agency, we contributed 20% to this project of our local money? Can we build the wall at the toe of the slope? Can we backfill it? Can we put a lower seawall walk there? Can we put stairs on the bluff? And can we put an upper seawall walk? And that was a great decision by our city council to partner local dollars, even though they didn't have to, and Highway 101 would be preserved. But what a great asset. And today there are upwards of 7,000 pedestrians and bicyclists a day that use that facility and on into the village of Carlsbad. Now this is a picture, the top picture is a picture of the seawall is constructed, and you can see it here. But the top part, the upper walkway, is not constructed. So you can see a bush that's in the bike lane, standing water that's in the bike lane, a pedestrian that's in a bike lane, the bicyclist who's trying to avoid the pedestrian is in the car lane, and the car that's trying to avoid the bicyclist is, by the way, it's a Chrysler K car, is splitting the lane. So not a great environment. And then if you look post-construction, and you take a look at this project, 3 abreast is no problem. Dogs are allowed on the top. There's lighting on the west side. The bike lanes are wide. There's a buffered bike lane, and there are several ways to access the coast with pedestrian activated lights to get from the east to west. So change is hard, and we're fearful of change because we're very comfortable with the status quo, but change can be good if we have the right values and do the right work, and this is certainly a project that did just that. Remember, the seawall was coming. That was a state project. My last picture, and this is really cool. So in Carlsbad, through lore and through oral histories, one generation removed, we knew there was a sign spanning Highway 101, but we had no proof of that. So enter the Carlsbad library system. They index their photos, and so do libraries up and down the state of California. They index their photos as well. So search strings were entered, and in Pomona, California, a family that once lived in this area had moved up to Pomona. Their parents passed away, and they donated all of their old pictures to the Pomona Library. A picture of the Carlsbad sign was found, and this was only found about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. In addition, a newspaper article was found in the Carlsbad Journal, and an engineered map was found showing parcelization, road alignment, as well as the location of the sign. So a company wanted to donate a sign, and a sign proponent wanted to get a sign installed on Carlsbad Boulevard. There was a little envy of the Encinitas sign. And then we've been trying, this individual had been trying for 10 years. But the application was rather generic, and it didn't speak to a sense of place. When we found that picture, we approached both the company and the individual saying, this is part of our history. This is our sign. This spanned Highway 101. It's the DNA from our past. Will you alter your application to the city? And of course, the applicant and the proponent were overjoyed to find the picture, and of course they did. So our sign was originally installed in 1935. It was the Art Deco era. The Encinitas sign was late 1920s, which was the Egyptian Revival era, so they're slightly different. But it's a beautiful sign, and it proudly hangs over our gateway today, very close to the original location. And I hope that you can see the design direction and DNA of the original sign in the sign that was produced. Lastly, these are my opinions, and it's my takeaway, and it's hopefully something that you'll think about. You are free to disagree, and I'm sure many of you will. But since Highway 101 in its beginning as a dirt paved road, it's always been adapting and changing to transportation innovation and the needs of the communities. Rural Carlsbad of a few thousand pre-World War II is not the same as Carlsbad today, and our values aren't the same. If we are rigid and kind of succumb to the status quo and don't change anything, it's going to fail. If we continue to be flexible and adaptive, making the road work for our communities, it will continue to succeed. And planning and transportation planning is not about how we led our lives the last 40 or 50 years and what we remember. It's about the next 50 and 100 years, and it's about the choices that younger generations are making. And they're making different choices than we're making. We were at a hotel, Cape Ray, today. 40% of the people are arriving by Uber and Lyft. And then once you're at the hotel, more than 50% of the people are choosing to go out for dinner, Uber and Lyft, even though they have their own car. They just don't want to risk it. That's an option that wasn't even around like 8 years ago. And car share wasn't around in 10 years ago. And the desire to live closer to work was not what it is today. It was about urban sprawl 20 or 30 years ago. So we have to plan for future generations in the work that we do to the road. And more importantly, we need to invite those younger generations into the conversation and help them lead as we accomplish these changes in our roadway. And lastly, I can't overemphasize this. I'm in love with the road, and many of us are. Gary talked about what a great job it is to have. It is one of the most scenic places in the world. It rivals the road on the Grand Canyon. It rivals great places of natural beauty. It is the end of a continent and the beginning of a great ocean. It is our interface with nature. And that needs to lead the discussion, not a typical discussion about, do we do an intersection? Do we do a roundabout? Do we do a traditional traffic light? What's the lane of the width? All those are important decisions, but what's most important is honoring our history. It was here before we were a state. It was here before Highway 5. It was here before the rail. It was here before El Camino Real. Honoring that history and honoring the very, very special place that the road runs within. So thank you for listening to me. I'm really going to enjoy the next two speakers, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Gary.
Well, thank you, Peter. While you were speaking, I got a telephone call from the Cal State San Marcos History Department, and they want to talk to you about a new history course they want to offer. I'm just saying. So I feel very privileged and honored to introduce our next speaker, Dan Burden. He's here with us today. Dan is seen as a visionary and a source of inspiration and collaboration throughout his career. Dan is a nationally recognized authority on active transportation, livable and sustainable communities, complete streets, safe routes to school, and bicycle and pedestrian facilities and programs. Dan has become known for his pioneering work and leadership to mentor many in transforming communities into places for people first, all while still accommodating the car and not the other way around. Since 2014, Dan has been the Director of Innovation and Inspiration at Blue Zones, where he oversees community environment transitions, making dozens and eventually hundreds of communities healthier and more active places to live. In 1980, Dan was chosen to help transform the Florida Department of Transportation, which made it one of the first multimodal transportation agencies in the nation. As early as 1991, well before the term complete streets was coined, Florida became known for its holistic look at street making, helping create place out of space. Dan pushed for change and became the nation's first full-time pedestrian and bicycle coordinator. That's now a position that is required in all 50 states. Dan and his wife co-founded Walkable Communities in 1996. Since then, he has helped more than 3,800 communities throughout the world become more livable and walkable. Dan's efforts to get the world back on its feet earned him two of the first ever awarded Lifetime Achievement Awards. The first was issued by the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals. The second was issued by the New Partners for Smart Growth. In 2001, Time magazine named Dan as one of the 6 most important civic innovators in the world. In 2014, the White House honored Dan as a champion of change in transportation. And after having spent the last day and a half with Dan, I can honestly say he is just one heck of a nice guy. It's my honor to introduce Dan Burden.
Thank you, Gary, and good evening, Carlsbad. I have to confess, this is the first time I've been to your community, although I've been working on the Coast Highway for quite a number of years, starting up in Bird Rock. But this is one of the most delightful communities I have come to, and I already rate you as one of the best, not just coastal communities, but the best communities I've had the chance to work in America, and I'll explain why. Thank you. I want to just say a little bit about what Blue Zones is, since it's probably a mystery. It's an organization, a for-profit organization that works mostly with health agencies and organizations to change communities from unhealthy places to those that are very healthy. It's based on the principles of Dan Buettner, National Geographic Fellow, who's now written 4 books for National Geographic, and we're now working in 37 communities, and someday I hope one of the communities will be here in the San Diego area. But with that, I want to start with a little storytelling. The gentleman standing in the left panel, I assume, would like the world to be what he sees in these images: family-focused, a place where we celebrate our successful main streets, everything. But I will share, he is standing in La La Land. That's Disney World. The real world became something very different because we took our eye off of the things we value the most. We sit in traffic a lot longer than we'd like to. We enter a community, we don't have any sense that we've left one and entered another. We get older and we realize we didn't build the infrastructure for walking, and indeed, it's not a safe environment for our children any longer. To point out that this is not unique to your area or even the entire region, I take you to this street. Notice the sign says to walk. No one is walking, and no one is bicycling, and yet the infrastructure is there to do exactly that. We've got sidewalks, we've got bike lanes, and if you hit this scene any morning on a school day, you'll sit there for 20 minutes because we only built for one transportation mode to succeed, and therefore failed that mode. And the key point is, this is Maui. This is a place you wouldn't think where you're going to go and sit in traffic for 20 minutes, but it's because we only planned for the car and failed everyone else. I also want to tell this story. At the age of 8, the great-grandfather, George, was able to, and did, walk 6 miles to go fishing. That was ordinary in 1919. The grandfather, Jack, in 1950, was able to walk about a mile to his own favorite woods. That was also very ordinary at that time. Jumping up to the mother, Vicky, at age 8, could walk a half a mile to her swimming pool. Dropping down to her son, Ed, is now able to walk at age 8 to the end of his block. It's not one thing, it's everything. We just completely started building everything for one way to get around, and therefore denied access for most people. So when we think of any beautiful place that's very precious and needs to be preserved and protected, we start to think about what is it we're doing right and what things could we learn from others. And that's my purpose tonight, is to share with you many success stories so that we realize that because the world is changing, we need to adapt, and we need to adapt in meaningful ways that helps protect and preserve the things we care about the most. So again, my delight in coming to Carlsbad, as well as yesterday touring Bird Rock, Encinitas, Leucadia, Solana Beach, and Oceanside, to realize what it is you hold in common and what makes each of you distinct. And that's what I want to focus on. But I am totally in love with Carlsbad. I love State Street. I love the wonderful pedestrian that actually has feet in this case, and flip-flops. That's you. That's what you care about, that you want people to walk places, so you listed it in blocks. I think that's cool. And you've down on, this is Carlsbad Street, right? State Street. The State Street. No, I'm sorry, the lower right? That's, yeah. 9.5-foot travel lanes. That takes courage. Not many communities are going down to 9.5-foot lanes, but you've done it because you want that border, you want that buffer to the sidewalks. You know how important that is. You may or may not see bicyclists here. You see some. But the point is, you don't want the motorist running right up against the pedestrian, and that's one benefit out of 22 for bike lanes or paved shoulders. You've been the innovators in many things here, and I'm delighted to see how well and how accomplished you are in many of your intersections. A lot of energy, a lot of work, a lot of ideation, and then some adaptation had to go into every single intersection. But you're among the first in the nation. You got one of the greatest treasures or prizes with the Coastal 101. Very light traffic when you start to measure traffic, and I'll explain why I say it's light. But you've already tried buffers for parking. You've got many variations on the scene. And so as I went out walking and as we led a group walk today, I got to see a lot of things in operation. So let me get into a couple of key principles I want to establish. That as we build to the future, not to the past, but to the future, every decision we make with transportation should increase the value of the human experience and the land that adjoins it. And as we do that, then that helps our designers figure out whether this foot belongs here or if it belongs somewhere else, how important is vegetative cover, how character-driven do we want a road to be. And so we're entering a brand new area in transportation with our engineers are being charged to think much more broadly than they were asked to in the start of their careers. But I want to talk about character, and I'm going to jump up to Petaluma momentarily. So when this neighborhood was reinvigorated, they took the materials and the history of the industry of the past, and so the new buildings now are driven by that character. So everything we do should be about who you are, what your history is, as we go forward to set the stage for the future. In Leucadia, we took this road, which I think is already rebuilt, or if not, just give it some time. But the first step is to, in this case, put a roundabout in, and then put the buildings in and activate it with people and so on. So our transportation decisions allow the development community to come in and make the right investments so we get a real good activation for an area. Gary said it well, but I'll repeat it. The future is about building our cities for people and accommodating cars, not the other way around. And if you want more traffic, though, just build for more traffic. And you'll get it. It's almost a guarantee. But I want to introduce a few advancements of that principle, and that is, certainly it's true of the Coastal 101, build for local traffic. Don't any longer build to support regional traffic. It can take care of itself. That's what we put the mega million-dollar investments in on the I-5. Treat this road for what it will want to do, needs to do, 364 and a half days a year. Maybe there'll be that time there's a hiccup that it gets another use, but don't build for that. Build for your everyday use. I want to also explain a principle in our blue zones world, and that is if we're going to reduce traffic, then we have to focus on what we call the life radius. So any of you can probably figure this out. 90% of your time, the things you go to, how many of you can have a life radius of 1 mile? Okay, half a dozen of you, yeah. Or 5 miles. How many hands? How many require 20 miles? Yeah. The point is, the more we can build our communities so that we have a short or a compact life radius, then the fewer times we get in the car. The more times we walk, the more times we bicycle. I'll give you just some overviews of some tools. Avon, in a very high altitude of Colorado, had 5 lanes here and knocked it down to 2 lanes. This is a photomorph. It hasn't been built yet. They're in the decision-making stage. So you can start to see some tools that we identify. We gave them some choices, so here's another set of options, a little different. But the point is, now we're not inducing speed. We're rewarding the short trip, and we're really capitalizing on the value of the adjacent lands. Very important. a very quick list of those things we're now encouraging communities to do. And the ones who are doing this the fastest are becoming the places where more jobs flow into and people have that higher quality of life. Real big on this, again, is don't build for peak hour. Typically, peak hour only is 15 minutes. And if you put all your resources into that, then you're failing to build the very qualities and the very essences people want, and you're inducing speed and doing many other things. This is really why that works. It's a very common principle in engineering that when you get up to 3 lanes, you've maxed out the carrying capacity per lane. Anything you add beyond 3 lanes is going to actually not carry as much traffic per lane. Does that all make sense? So it's good that the reverse is true. The more you take lanes out, the more you can get back to that ideal carrying capacity. We also, just to show you what that 15-minute peak looks like, this is what we've been building for. This is where we've been putting all of our money and why we've made it just absolutely stupid to try to cross the street in a car or bike in off-peak hours because we're only building for the peak, that 15 minutes. So great news that you're dropping that whole idea that you've got to honor the peak no matter what you do. So we say, well, we need some new things to measure. If we're not going to measure levels of service, how do we handle that peak hour? It's up to all of you in the room today to figure out what it is you want in that beaker. How many children you see walking. If you see your elders enjoying the community they invested in. Whatever it is, that's got to be measured, and you've got to be able to use that as your common sense measure. I will say that it's a long-term investment. Madison, Wisconsin. I can point the camera in almost any direction, and this is an easy photo to take. And most people I get to talk to, they say, that's what we want. Well, you work toward that, and it's just a matter of where you put your money investment. Just a little more science, and I'll get back to the fun stuff. This is where the engineers went wrong. They were charged with and did build to a 20-year forecast. It was all based on real rock-hard science, modeling and things like that. But what they failed to notice is they were inducing more traffic. Made it easier for people to live further out and to make more trips. And that just kept going and going and going. Finally, there are engineers that are now saying, none of that. We now don't want to induce more traffic. So I'm going to show you the tools that are now being applied to no longer induce traffic. Lancaster, California, took the street you see on top and turned it into the street you see on the bottom. They went from 5 lanes down to 2. They went from 30, 40, even 50 miles an hour through their downtown to about 19 on a really good day when you have no one in front of you. It's a beautiful town. They've brought huge investments in. It's now one of the most celebrated new downtowns in America. It's really cool. So let's talk about what those tools are to bring the speeds down. What I call the target speed, the speed that you want. And it has nothing to do with what you post. It's what you design for and therefore get. So the target speed here, what would you say people are ordinarily doing on this street? It's at Nord Avenue in Chico. High speeds, right? What if you did this? 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 Now, this is as far as the engineer is permitted to go. But what the engineer has done is set the stage for the developer and the architect to come in and do this. And that's what brings it finally down to our magic number, which is 19 miles per hour. The buildings need to relate just as the vertical walls and the terminating vistas help. I want to celebrate Carlsbad for many things, but one I want to celebrate on is you've learned how to do things without spending everything. Some of the things you're doing are very low price. This is a town I worked in on the Gulf Coast that the speeds are a little high. And I'll tell you a number of reasons they're high is that stupid center line. When you don't need a center line, you take it out. It's telling the motors, this is all yours, take it, grow with it. So what if we take that center line out and save a little money on the paint and then put in some edge lines in this case some Sharrows too, the speeds are going to come down. They come down because the motors is uncertain. And uncertainty means people will be more cautious. And if that's not enough, we were out walking one of your side roads today in Carlsbad. What was the road we were walking down, the neighborhood street? Come on, Craig. Thank you. This is just a light domed mini circle. Big semis could turn left there if they need to, but the point is the motors doesn't pick up speed on their approach, they slow down. And so very simple, very low-cost treatments are sometimes the best, and we encourage you to explore those options. Gateways. Trees are amazing tools, creating that vertical wall that bring the speeds down and really make a place feel that it's really a place for nature, for walking, for all the things. And so we took this street where people had been doing over 80 miles an hour, converted it, and most everyone now does 30. And again, it's about landscaping is as important as the lane dimensions and things like that. Gateways into a community. This is Brattleboro. Imagine if that street looked more like this. Very likely you'll be drawn into the downtown because they've done such a great job on their signature street that you now want to go and spend more time in the actual downtown. Muscatine, this is one of our Blue Zones communities with probably with our staff time, we've spent $100,000, and that's probably on the high end. That town has now brought in $465 million. Now they were poised, they were ready to do it just like you are, but we gave them that extra nudge with the Blue Zones efforts, and that road, which has to be rebuilt because the railroad has to come up higher because of the Mississippi River. And so they're going to invest the money in the road. We're going to go down to 2 lanes. We're going to add more parking and a bit of a transition lane, the very thing we did in Bird Rock, right? And they've already seen that level of investment coming to their town because the towns are in competition, and the ones that look like they're embracing the future and they're ready for the future are the ones that receive the added support income, whether we're talking about government funds, foundation funds, developers. It's all about who is trying the best new ideas and pulling them off. Other new tools that I could not have offered 10 years ago, protected bike lanes. You're already launching some, but very powerful. This is a bridge just for bicyclist transit and walking. A raised island to help the pedestrian get across the street on what we call a pork chop. The engineers do at least. And so you stage your way across the street, but you make it very clear to the motorists they are to yield to people on bikes or walking. A very simple tool, and this is one of my favorites, is to not go with wider lanes than you need. And I'm, again, very proud of Carlsbad. You're down to 9.5-foot lanes where it made sense. You're down to 10-foot lanes on the coastal highway. That's a pretty big road to go down to 10-foot lanes. 10-foot lanes, obviously cheaper, give you more space to do the other things you'd like to do, but they also marginally are safer than 11-foot or 12-foot lanes. So we're seeing narrower lanes everywhere in the nation. This was one in Olympia, Washington. Motorists are more vigilant when they're in a narrower lane. They're less likely to get on and try to text. I'm not going to say it's foolproof. Roundabouts, something I'm, again, very proud of the whole region for figuring out how important roundabouts are. For carrying capacity, roundabouts are like a home run. You can move more vehicles in your lanes, about 30% more than you can with a conventional signal system or four-way stop control. So they proved that up in Bird Rock. So with a 2-lane road, when you get your volumes way up, 25,000 vehicles a day, you have to add lanes. There's just nothing else you can do and not back up traffic. But look at the bottom photo. That's also carrying or capable of carrying 25,000 vehicles a day. But look at how much real estate we save as opposed to going to all the added lanes and so on and so forth. This is one of my first roundabouts. It's in Brighton, Michigan. And it has to carry about 25,000 cars a day. So the numbers I gave you aren't theoretical. There's a railroad track, so cars can back up for a mile. And so that all has to be released at once. The question came up, well, what about the side street traffic? Or in your case, I think one you're looking at has driveways. The cool thing about a roundabout is it creates natural gaps. So you're likely to get into a gap easier when you use a roundabout system than you are with any other system. So in the peak hour, peak day, peak season, I can get into this roundabout from a side street in 40 seconds with a signal, probably not for 2 or 3 minutes, right? Much safer, 90% reduction in personal injury crashes, but they can improve an entire city. This is one of my favorites, Hamburg, New York. We were challenged to rebuild this street. We took out all the traffic signals, put in roundabouts, narrowed the lanes down to 9.5 feet. And so you weren't the first. The parking's only 6 feet wide. But notice we put in a transition lane, right? So it's safer, easier getting out of your parked car. And the speeds are now so low that cyclists feel very comfortable there, and pedestrians. They went from pulling 9 building permits per year clear up to 99 per year after this project went in. And again, you can see it at grade and how tight those lanes are and the fact that it still works. This is a major truck route for New York State. And it's easier for a truck driver just to stay in motion, not to stop and then start and then stop and start, but just to keep cruising. A couple of the areas were very tough. We had to make a very small, compact raised island here and a big truck apron, but we were able to honor the buildings. And since the roundabouts went in Hamburg, the crashes came down anywhere from 63 to 85% based on the intersection and certain other items. A few more tools. You can colorize your bike lanes and or go with what is now called a mini roundabout. It's nearly flat. So a big semi can go in and you can use much tighter real estate than you would if you had to do the full raised island. But now I want to celebrate Bird Rock. Bird Rock, when I first arrived, I think it was close to the year 2000, was 78 feet across. Pedestrians had to wait a long time before they could break into the cycle, and when they did, they had a long journey across a fairly dangerous street. The same pedestrian today only crosses 14 feet at a time. It's an amazing adaptation. It's brought out 10-fold, 20-fold, 40-fold. I've lost count. More pedestrians, more bicyclists. The businesses are doing far better. The motorists are enjoying yielding. They're typically only going 19 miles an hour, but they get home sooner. And the reason they get home sooner is they don't stop. And so it works. We had to introduce another tool because we have to move 23,000 cars here. That's far more than you have to worry about. So we put in angled parking to add more parking, but we put in this transition space between the car and the travel lane. So the motorists can actually get out of the travel lane and I'll honor the through movement. It's been working beautifully for quite a number of years. And you can see an actual motorist making that transition here. And so again, a before, this is Bird Rock, La Jolla Boulevard. And, oh, come on. We'll get back, come on. Okay, so this is before, and this is after. And this is, make sure I don't go too fast here, before, and this is after. It's an amazing change, and this is being celebrated, by the way, throughout the nation. Norman, Oklahoma wanted a gateway into the great University of Oklahoma. So this is what we're envisioning for them. Look at, again, some new tools, back in angled parking. It doesn't work everywhere, but where you can get it to work, it's the preferred, it's the safest way to park, and pretty valuable. Now let's go to Solana Beach. This has not been built. It probably won't be built. I apologize. We did our part. We came up with some good designs. This is the existing condition for the most part. But what we're saying is that they could go on the left-hand side to back in angle parking, have that buffer zone, have the bike lane. In fact, you can put the bike lane right next to parking when it's back in, right? Another variation, we take the northbound lane down to a single lane. There's no interruption of traffic there. They can move all the traffic they need plus more in one lane. And it works pretty well, but now I'm going to take you to the most radical treatment of all, and this is what I wish they had built, but they didn't. Colorized bike lanes. Okay, down to 5 minutes. That's good. Thanks for Gary. And going with a dedicated bike lane space here, and still a through lane that works really well because as the most motor transitions into or out of parking, they're not impeding on the flow of that travel lane. So I just wanted to give you a flavor of some of the ideas people are now trying. Some towns have not been courageous enough to put the plans in operation, but the ones that have done some pretty cool things. And but I wanted you to have this, and also to celebrate all of the wonderful tools I'm seeing in Carlsbad that are on the ground that I'm not seeing in other parts of the nation. So I encourage you, I actually implore you to go forward and start thinking of all the different things that the cities around you are doing, but some others that you can now import from other parts of the country. The game has changed. We no longer need multiple lanes on the coastal highway. You actually can move cars better, safer, easier, and give yourselves permission to do more things in the future. So with that, Gary, let me turn it over to my remaining speaker, Kathleen. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dan, for giving us a look at planning trends around the country and how we may apply them in our own backyard to improve our quality of life. I just want to remind everybody that we're going to, after the next and final speaker, we're going to have a question and answer session. So if you have any question cards that you haven't given to city staff yet, if you could hold those up and they'll pick them up, or if you'd like a question card, they'll come get those and give you one. Okay, our third and final speaker today, Kathleen Ferrier, comes to us from Circulate San Diego, a local nonprofit organization whose mission is to create excellent mobility choices in vibrant, healthy neighborhoods. It's kind of hard to argue against that. Kathleen is the Director of Advocacy for Circulate San Diego, where she takes the lead on building public support for active transportation, better transit, and sustainable land use. Key to her position is ongoing outreach to community members, government officials, and city staff about the benefits of walkable, bikeable communities that are well served by transit. In her capacity, she has spearheaded numerous workshops and lectures on complete streets, worked with communities across the region to understand local decision-making processes to implement safe infrastructure. She's authored or co-authored numerous studies and created the San Diego Regional Walk Scorecard. Prior to joining Circulate San Diego, Kathleen worked as a senior planner for De Lorenzo Incorporated, a local planning and landscape architectural firm, and as project manager for Carter Reese & Associates, a development company dedicated to infill development. Please welcome Kathleen Ferrier.
Great, good afternoon. It is an honor to be part of this very prestigious panel, and I'm very pleased to be part of this conversation in Carlsbad and to see so many of you out there in the audience. My role today is to talk a little bit about what's happening in the San Diego region. I think this is really a great lead up with the history provided by Peter, examples from around the country provided by Dan, and so now I'll talk a little bit about San Diego. First, I will give a little bit of information about Circulate San Diego. We are a regional nonprofit organization. We have about 9 staff people. We've been in operation since 1994, and we work with cities and communities across the region to make complete streets, safe streets, to work on land use and transportation policy so that good decisions can be the norm and for our communities. So let's see. Oh boy, I really went way ahead. Okay. So I'm pleased to start with Carlsbad. All good things in the region start in Carlsbad, right? And I'm glad to see that Mayor Hall is here because when this project was done, I believe, which was actually catalytic for the region, he was mayor and very supportive, and the council was very supportive at the time of Complete Streets. And Complete Streets, which is designing streets for everyone on the road, was one of the major council goals for a couple of years. And I'm also going, with this picture and with the rest of the slides that I'm going to show, really build on the themes that Peter and Dan talked about, which is adaptation and also kind of an evolution in how we think about our streets. So this picture, as you know, is Coast Highway 101. And as Dan mentioned, it went down to 10-foot lanes. And the great thing about this project is a lot was achieved with paint. And as you know, cities update paving, repave their roads on an ongoing basis. And Carlsbad was one of the first cities in our region to say, hey, you know what, as we're repaving, why don't we rethink our street design? Why don't we take advantage of this opportunity to repaint and offer space for people other than cars? And so here, I believe there might have been a bike lane previously, but what this did is that it widened the bike lane. There's actually a couple of variations. You can see the buffer between the bike lane and the cars, which offers more space so that the bicyclist is safer, doesn't get doored. And then there are other sections where there's a buffer on the left side of the bike lane so that it offers more space. And we know that by doing that, it actually encourages more people to bicycle because it makes them feel safer by having more space. So this was a really great project, and actually Carlsbad did a lot of this around the city, and other cities started coming to Carlsbad, talking to you and saying, hey, let's learn more about this repaving because we want to do the same thing in our cities. And one of those cities is San Diego. So this is another example, 4th Avenue, which runs north-south connecting Hillcrest community to downtown, and it's 3 lanes of travel for cars. And with the repaving job that they did, it was about a mile long, they actually took an entire lane and dedicated it to bicycles. And we've since learned that the amount of bicycling on this corridor actually grew by 350%. So it made a big difference because by offering this dedicated facility, whereas previously there was nothing there for bicycling, they were just merging with traffic, it really gave people the encouragement that they needed to feel safer on the road, and more people were bicycling as a result. Okay, so this is an evolution. So what those pictures with repaving are kind of the genesis, but as the cities start to think more and more about how to accommodate people, as Dan said, how do we design our streets for people, it's really evolving. And the examples that Dan showed are really good. This is one of the newest projects in the city of San Diego with a roundabout, and it's an exciting project in the community of City Heights. And the city of San Diego, this is part of the city's Vision Zero initiative, which is an initiative to get to 0 traffic deaths by 2025. And so the city looked at where were crashes most prevalent in the city, and they found this 1/2 mile segment in City Heights, which is a lower income neighborhood that really has been underinvested for decades, and found that specifically people walking were really endangered because there was just so much chaos happening on the street. And so over the course of time working with community folks, including us at Circulate, and actually again building on I think the roundabouts in Bird Rock, the city is now proposing 3 roundabouts in the middle of City Heights in their downtown area, as well as protected bike lanes and wider sidewalks. So the city applied for grant funding. They got almost $6 million, and this project will start construction next year. So pretty significant for the city in its urban neighborhood to really transform City Heights. Another good example is in Oceanside, and I see Dave DiPiero out there. This is a great example for the region. Hopefully many of you are familiar with it if you've been to Oceanside recently. This project is interesting because it started when we still had redevelopment in place, so there was some funding for it, but became a really good example for other cities. You can see the before picture in the top left where it's just a traditional 4-lane street. You can see that pedestrian there bravely crossing. And then the transformation in the bottom right which was turning the street into one way and widening the sidewalks 15, 20 feet. Pretty significant. Now, most of the restaurants that are along that Mission Avenue now have outdoor dining. It's really vibrant, lots of people walking. It also provided the opportunity to add trees and signage. And we're currently at Circulate, we're looking at some of the economic data for the results of this project. But just talking to shop owners and people in the area, there's been really positive feedback and definitely stories about how sales have grown and that new restaurants are opening up. Another example here in North County that you guys are probably familiar with in Solana Beach, and this goes back to Coast Highway 101. Where the city used its own money to bond against some of its sales tax dollars to look at a mile segment of the Coast Highway 101 and transform it to really accommodate more people than cars. So again, looking at widening the sidewalks, I think that's really one of the most significant changes that happened as part of this project, really introducing art, as you can see in the bottom right corner, narrowing the travel lanes, introducing new bike facilities, mostly Sharrows, and then introducing new pedestrian crossings, which I think are some of the best in the region. I get really excited about excellent pedestrian crossings. In fact, I have a picture. Here it is. I should know the technical term, but it allows for people to cross each leg of the street safely. And it's a really great example, and it's amazing to see this on Highway 101, where we know the history and there's so many cars and so much activity, but it demonstrates that these kinds of facilities make sense on a variety of streets to make it safer for everyone. And let's see, I have a slide. Something happened here. We did talk to a number of businesses along this corridor and actually looked at sales tax data and found that sales increased on average 10% for the businesses after this project was installed. So because we're talking not only about walking and biking, I wanted to incorporate something about train travel. This is a great project in Encinitas, long time coming, and I know there are more projects like this planned that was paid for by a regional government, but really providing safe crossing over the railroad tracks, which is really unique to North County with the railroad tracks that you have running through your communities. I think this is a great example, and I look forward to seeing more of these built. So Dan mentioned Bird Rock, and I have some pictures of that, but I just want to mention that we looked at sales tax data for that project and found that among 94 businesses along the corridor, after the project was constructed, there was a 24% increase in sales tax collections. So we're in the process of updating this data because it goes to 2010. But it's significant because at the time there was the Great Recession and still these businesses were able to thrive. And just anecdotally talking to people, we know that so many people see that as a destination more than just passing through. A lot more people are walking, biking to this place, to the restaurants that are there as a destination. And just another aside, I think is an interesting thing that we don't often think about with these kinds of projects. The noise levels reduced dramatically on La Jolla Boulevard as a result of this project. And so you've been in those situations like I have where you're walking along the streets and the passing of the cars is just deafening. And it's something that we've just gotten used to, probably because that's part of our life. But you go to La Jolla Boulevard and the roundabouts, because they're keeping the traffic moving at a slow pace, really offers just a dramatic change and makes it much more pleasant to be there. Okay, so I'm sorry, somehow these slides got out of order. This was the slide showing Solana Beach and the sales tax increase. Okay, so shifting gears just a little bit, because Peter asked me to talk about what young people today, like myself, of course, want to see in our streets. Increasingly, with the revolution of complete streets, we're seeing streets more for other modes, not just driving, but walking and biking. But now we're really looking at streets just as public spaces in general. We have so much of our communities dedicated to asphalt, to streets. So people are thinking really differently. How do we use this asset to really transform our communities, not just to get people around, but to provide public spaces? And there's some really interesting things happening around the country and even in our region around this. So one of these examples is parklets, and I know Carlsbad has some. There's some others in North County. Are you guys familiar with the term parklet? Yes, some hands going up, not as many as I thought. The idea with parklets came from San Francisco, which may not be too popular. That is a photo of San Francisco in the top left. And the idea was, you know what, we use these spaces, 8.5 by 11, for cars, but yet that's valuable public space. What if we transform that very small space into a small park? And the idea caught on, and there's actually International Parking Day, literally where it's celebrated across the world, and then where people are demonstrating how this can be done. And now cities are also creating policies to institutionalize parklets in their city. The picture on the bottom right shows a parklet in San Diego in the community of North Park. It too is attached to a restaurant, which is often what you find, but not always. So I have one picture from New York City. I try not to do that too much, but I think this is just such an interesting example. This is looking again at our streets as public places and what are short-term, low-cost improvements that can be done. So you can see this is like a long pork chop where you've got that small median and then 2 lanes of travel, and not too many people walking or gathering there. New York decided to change that, and they dedicated that right-hand portion of the road just to people walking and to gathering. And then you can tell on the left-hand side of that pork chop, they narrowed that travel lane. So getting to some of those ideas that Dan was introducing, where more narrow travel lanes really makes it safer, and then it offers more space to do other cool things. So this is a great example of that New York City was able to achieve with just paint and some planters. Intersection murals, at least that's what we call them in San Diego. These are happening in actually cities across the country. This, again, is an example in San Diego, where the idea is to paint the street, primarily in front of schools is where we've seen them, and it accomplishes a lot of things. One, the design is usually designed by someone local, whether it's a student or a family or a local artist. And then the way that it's installed is with the community. And so it's kind of like a paint by number situation where the community comes out, they have one big build day, and they paint it all together. And then the other benefit of this is that it actually serves as traffic calming. So in addition to being beautiful, it can also slow cars down because cars approach it a little bit with hesitance because they're not sure what's going on. And so, especially in front of schools, you can imagine that this is really effective. And so we're seeing a lot of these now pop up in San Diego, and Circulate is working with the city staff to create a policy that institutionalizes these so that it makes it easier for communities to implement. This is another project that we're working on at Circulate in City Heights. The idea behind this project, and the pictures don't really convey everything, but the idea was, how do we improve our transit experience? How do we create more with our street in this one section of City Heights, which is a major transit corridor for the community? It's the most highly traveled transit corridor in the community and is also the home of the new bus rapid transit line. So we chose one of the routes that has the highest, or one of the stops that has the highest ridership. We worked with community members to find out how can we really improve the transit ridership experience here and improve our streets. And what we did is the picture on the top right is actually an entry into an alley, and you can see it on the top left too. If you continued on to the right, you'd find this alley that had been pretty abandoned. We had a community build day and we painted a mural, and it was participatory. We spent about 8 hours out there and gave everybody a chance to paint their own portion of the mural. And then at the bottom is a Doors of the World exhibit that we created with some community folks because City Heights has such an international history. And those doors are actually screening a U-Haul facility that's right behind the transit stop that people said felt hostile and ugly. And so we came up with this idea with the community to create, to install there. And we're working now on more permanent art installations. And then one last example, this is also in City Heights. I think that's a result of our partnership with the organization that's there, the City Heights Community Development Corporation. But the picture on the top left is a median. This is on University Avenue, which is a major corridor that runs east-west in San Diego through City Heights. It's that same corridor I showed you where the roundabouts are. This is further east. So it's actually very crash prone as well. And it has a heavy concentration of Somali families and businesses. We've been working with those businesses and this local organization to transform that median. So, when we think about streets, again, as moving people around, we don't often think about them as gathering spaces. But the people in this community really saw this median, and you can see it's a wide median, so it's not a traditional median in the middle of moving cars, but it is between two streets. But they saw it as a gathering space, and in fact, people were hanging out there, but it wasn't really designed as a way to accommodate people. So we worked with them. In the bottom right picture, you can see we built some tables and some chairs. There's a game in the middle called Laddu that is a traditional Somali game that is there in that median now and allows people to gather. So kind of an atraditional use of street space. And then final point, so there's a lot happening, a lot that's been constructed, but a lot more is planned. And you're experiencing that here in your communities. Our regional government is planning a series of urban bikeways, more than 20 miles, that we're going to see come online in the next 2 or 3 years. And we're also going to see downtown a series of protected bikeways and new pedestrian walkways. This image is from a new downtown plan that was approved last year that really looks at how to use streets differently based on kind of their function within downtown. So really exciting things happening now and more good things to come in the future. And I think that's all. So thank you again. Should I just stay up here?
Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. Okay, I was just going to invite the other two speakers up to the stage, but they're ahead of me. We're now going to enter the Q&A phase. Little long on schedule here, so we'll take a few questions. If we don't get to your question, we will be, after the program, in the courtyard, and you can come up to any staff member and ask questions, or any panelists. Okay, our first question. Could you talk more about the economic benefits of coastal improvements?
I'll just share an example in the city of Encinitas. They invested in streetscape in 2001. Let me turn this on.
Is it on? Can you hear us?
Yeah.
We good? Okay, I just used the example, investment in streetscape in 2001. Modest in terms of the tools that were available then versus what's now, but the economic impact of that investment was substantial. And I think the sales tax increase, we were probably averaging around $250,000 a quarter or $1 million a year of income to the city. And right now, I believe it's close to $2 million a year, or close to $500,000 a quarter.
I can use examples from other cities. The normal lift that we get out of a rebuilt street for people is at that 30% level. And that's almost immediate. And then it tends to go up from there once more businesses move in and so on. So it's a pretty substantial economic gain.
Yeah. And to offer, well, not to be negative, but I do want to mention, because in talking to folks about projects before they come online, there's always a concern about construction during construction. There's definitely a decline during construction. But that is a short period for the longer term gain.
Yeah, one more, as we often put things in terms of economics, and that's fair, but it's not the total picture. I think the total picture in Encinitas and what's happening in Carlsbad is we had a community that really it lived down there, but it didn't do its prime shopping in downtown Encinitas. It went elsewhere for its prime shopping. And hardware store came in, grocery store came in, and really the community of Encinitas is less on the road now, going out to New Encinitas or other places, and is kind of hugging their downtown as their prime shopping corridor. And that, of course, means a higher income.
What type of reduction in noise can we expect from a traffic calming project?
Well, I mentioned that, and I don't have the exact figures, but it's pretty significant, and I think the project in Bird Rock is a really good example. It's not And that project, the resulting reduction in noise came from the roundabouts, which keeps cars moving at a slower rate. But also, if you can reduce the number of cars on the street, clearly, and you have more people walking and biking, then it's going to be significant. And to experience it is really, really interesting, because it's one of those things you don't think about.
Yeah. And the figure I got from Walk San Diego years ago, and it's now published by the Federal Highway Administration, is a 77% reduction
Oh, I need to learn that.
on
That's
La Jolla Boulevard. And another figure I like to share with audiences is that 43 miles an hour seems to be the break point. Anything above 43 miles an hour, when you get to that level, noise goes up about 1,000%. So anything we can do to get traffic speeds down to 30, even 35, we're talking about substantial reductions in noise and therefore comfort. So cities weren't designed for 40, 45, 50 miles an hour, and we shouldn't be tolerating speeds at that height if we don't want to deal with just the noise alone. Yeah.
So we had a couple questions about reverse angle or back in diagonal, the benefits of that or disbenefits versus traditional pull-in diagonal.
Let me start. City of Del Mar recently installed it by Dog Beach. And if you have areas that are up against community parks or areas that are up against the beaches, and if you think about how you unload your car, if you're pulling in frontwards, your children are walking behind your car and you're getting all your gear out of your tailgate. So especially in those situations, back in diagonal, you park the same number of cars, there's a bike benefit, but there really is a benefit in terms of the safety of the children or when you're loading gear to go to the beach or to the park. And it's always perplexed me, and I talk about this a lot with my wife. You pull into the driveway and you back out of the driveway, but when you think about backing into the driveway, you say, I can't do it, it's too hard. Well, you do it both ways one time, and back in diagonal parking is kind of the same little mind twister, I guess.
I like to share with people that back-in angle parking is only the first step of parallel parking. I mean, that's all it is. And the other benefits are it is the safest way to park a car. It also takes up less space. There's a slight overhang, a greater overhang on the back end of the car, so you're out of the street a little more. It also means that you can truly run a low-speed travel lane right next to the parking lane. You can't do that with head-in angle parking. It wouldn't be safe. It wouldn't be good engineering. Yeah.
Okay, great. Several questions about roundabouts, and they're new, they're different. How can we test or ensure that they won't cause traffic problems ahead of time?
Well, I'll start by defending the engineering profession. Engineers don't ever want to make a mistake. Their caution is going to make sure that you don't build something that won't work. But there are ways you can test out roundabouts in advance before you build them, before the big expenses. When we did the roundabouts in Hamburg, one particular roundabout concerned us about how semi-tractor trailer operators could make a left-hand turn. We couldn't get the geometrics to work in the space we had. So we went out and set up a fake roundabout using traffic cones in a large field. Then somebody was bright enough to go over to a trucker's cafe and hand $20 to a truck driver and said, show us how you would make a left-hand turn. And it was amazing. The truck driver collected the $20, went around the roundabout, didn't turn, it was a right turn they were worried about, missed taking the right turn, didn't want to because he knew he couldn't do it. So he went all the way around the roundabout and then exited on the right-hand turn. So sometimes just working with the people who are going to use a roundabout, we can model and project very carefully and very scientifically how they'll work. The one thing about a roundabout to pay attention to is the first month. People are going to be more cautious, and you're not going to gain all the capacity that you want. But by the second month, pretty much everyone's figured it out, and you're running full 30% more traffic than you would if it was just conventional lanes.
And I think I'll speak from the Carlsbad experience, and I don't want to quote our fire chief here, but, our fire personnel are often responding to accidents on Highway 101, and there are injuries or fatalities on Highway 101. In our fire department, we do have fender benders on our roundabout, especially when it was new. It's becoming less and less and less and less. They're happy to respond to an accident where there's damage to the car, where it's a fender bender. And roundabouts essentially are lower speed impacts. They're not T-bones, and they're not somebody running a red light. So when accidents do happen, they're typically, the fender bender type. And that is it may not be a pleasure for the driver, but it's a very, big pleasure or a much better situation to respond to than some child on the road or some major accident.
Yeah. And I'll just say for the other cities in San Diego region that more and more cities are looking to roundabouts because of these benefits, incredible safety benefits for people walking and biking because of the slower traffic speeds. But then also the ability, like Dan said, to keep the cars moving. Cars, if they're moving at 30 miles an hour down a corridor, they can actually get from point A to point B in the same time frame as if you're stopping and starting with red lights.
Great, thank you. So roundabouts again, but this time bicyclists and bikes through a roundabout. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, when you use a string of roundabouts, or even a single roundabout, you're bringing the motors down to the bicyclist speed. So you're on totally leveling the playing field. Those cyclists that are very experienced, and you've got many of them here, would prefer to stay in the lane and just circulate through and so on. That's great. But the same cyclist, if they're with their family, they might prefer to have an exit up, so they go around with their family and come back in on the other side. So we often design to have the bypass, we call it the bicycle bypass, but it's mostly just for families or for children on the way to school or something like that. The highly experienced cyclist knows they don't need to exit, they can just go right through.
Great. So our last question, and if we didn't get to yours again, we'll be in the courtyard. In a traffic calming or road diet project, how important is the beautification aspect? Undergrounding utilities, landscaping, hardscape?
Yeah.
The three speakers would like to handle a couple more questions, so we're.
I'm trying to respect the time, but we do have more if you want to keep
A
going.
couple more. So your question is the landscape.
I think the important thing is where the engineers used to have all the fun that did everything with the geometrics and operations, it's now time for the beauty, the people that love beauty, right? To be able to put in really good ground cover, vertical height, and so on, lots of green and lots of other colors, and create shade and everything else. I would say the beautification of a road is more important than the geometrics. If you get the beautification right, and I've just seen it so many times, the motorists respond to that. They don't want to go fast through a beautiful or attractive area. So I'd say leaving the landscape materials out is the last thing you want to do because you're only going to get a small part of the effect. But as an example, when the motorist looks ahead, say 1,000 feet, and they see with the landscaping materials that the road looks like it ends, they're not going to pick up speed for 1,000 feet. So you're getting the traffic calming effects further back, much further back, if you use really good landscape materials.
I just want to add, it's absolutely critical, and I would, if there are still decision makers here, it's worth the extra money to put in those details because doing a half project isn't going to accomplish your goals. And the first question that we were asked is about economic benefits. And we've all been talking about that. We've also been talking about just livability in general. Without those details, the project is not going to succeed, really. You need those because it gets more people out, walking, biking, just on the street as a destination, as we said before, and that's absolutely critical.
The beauty of the Buena Vista roundabout between Oceanside, Buena Vista Lagoon roundabout between Oceanside and Carlsbad, first of all, you could go from State Street to Carlsbad Boulevard and back forward, and that's a turn that you could never make before, so it improves circulation. But the beauty of the lagoon between Oceanside and Carlsbad, going from a 3-lane configuration, which was required with the old intersection, to a 2-lane. And this dedicated trail system for bikes and pedestrians is off the road and protected. And then you start taking a look at Maxton Brown Park and you start cleaning up the landscaping and get rid of the old chain link fence. That whole area, not just the roundabout, but that whole area coming across the lagoon has improved significantly, a mile long, because of that one improvement.
So here in Carlsbad Boulevard, there's something on the west side of the road, the Pacific Ocean, right? And people travel that roadway to see the views, whether they're heading southbound or northbound. They can become distracted. So how do you keep and deal with pedestrians and bicyclists and vehicles mixing in that kind of environment?
Let me just say how fortunate we are in Carlsbad. If you're on Highway 101 in Oceanside, 95% of it, you have buildings on both sides. It's basically the Oceanside Harbor and Buena Vista Lagoon. If you're in Encinitas, it really doesn't clear up until you pass downtown Encinitas. Leucadia and in downtown Encinitas, you really can't see the ocean. Peak of Moonlight Beach, and then you get past the downtown, you get to Swami's, you can see it. So, maybe a third. Solana Beach is similar. In Carlsbad, 80% of our beach is publicly accessible, and there are no buildings there. It's only 20% that have buildings on it. So what a gift, and that's the public commons that I talk about and how beautiful it is. And I know distractions in general, we're trying to get you to pay attention. If you have wider lanes and you feel safer, it's easier to be distracted and to take a look around and to use your cell phone and do all that, but I'll let the experts talk to that.
I just kind of a closing comment. I consider the coastal community one of the most pristine and beautiful areas in the entire world. I've traveled a lot, and the caretaking that is so important with this community is first. And but we do need to embrace the future. We do need to make the changes that are going to make the Coastal Highway the right design for the future, to serve the community first, but to be that always strong magnet that people just say, oh my gosh, you've got to go down and spend some time in Southern California, San Diego, but you've got to get the beach communities. Otherwise, you haven't been there. Yeah.
One last question. Again, Carlsbad Boulevard, 2 lanes versus 4 lanes. If you reduce the lanes, will that reduce the number of vehicles? And is that kind of the intent? Or can you accommodate traffic on 2 lanes that you can accommodate on 4 lanes?
I'll lead off with experience. And again, the city of Encinitas, there's about a 1.5 mile stretch of northbound Highway 101 that is north of Leucadia Boulevard and south of La Costa Avenue. And it was not a fun 2 years of my life to try and get the community to do a lane drop and drop that lane, because it simply wasn't necessary. We didn't have enough traffic on that road, and what you get when you do that is something else, right? So you get space, and you can use that space for parking, you can use it for landscaping, you can use it for walking, you can use it for whatever you want to use it for. That improvement has been in 5 years now, and it's a no-brainer. If you drive that area, do this for Carlsbad. So get off at Leucadia Boulevard, experience the 2 roundabouts, drive that northbound 1-lane section. Speeds are down to about 35 miles an hour or 30 miles an hour. They used to be a lot higher. And then transition into Carlsbad, cross La Costa Avenue, and see if the conditions are the same and it would work there. And then understand what you get in terms of biking and pathways or natural area in exchange for that. I think you would be surprised.
To me, as an outsider who's worked in many communities, the numbers that you need to crunch, the traffic numbers, are very benign. You can easily handle lane reductions and then have the decision of what is the better use of that space. And you're going to accommodate the pedestrian better, you'll accommodate the bicyclist better. We have more on-street parking where that's desired, and you will not grow your traffic. I think that's the critical thing, is we're through in our country with growing our traffic as though we had endless amounts of land, endless amounts of money, and we could sacrifice endless numbers of lives. All that's changed. It's a new era, and anything you do should really be designed to make things smaller, more compact, more attractive, and more of what you fall in love with.
And I'll just add,
looking just at studies aren't as exciting, but they back up what we're talking about. Studies will show that oftentimes after a road diet, but by the way, that term was coined by Dan here, when streets are taken from 4 to 2 lanes, that the same number of cars are accommodated, that the number of cars on that street typically stays the same.
Yeah. Great. Any concluding remarks from any panelists, if you'd like to?
Sorry we took so long in our presentations.
No.
Yeah, thank you for your patience, and go out, build the future.
Yeah.
All right, big thank you to our panelists. I want to also thank our Dove Library staff for helping accommodate us here, and thanks to all of you who came today. We really hope you enjoyed it. And we'll be in the courtyard if you have any follow-up questions.